Zelensky a dictator, does he view Putin as a dictator? And does he want Zelensky out of power? I know he's called for elections.
Look, President Trump is obviously very frustrated right now with President Zelensky. The fact that he hasn't come to the table, that he hasn't been willing to take this opportunity that we have offered. I think he eventually will get to that point, and I hope so very quickly.
Who does he think is more responsible for the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Putin or Zelensky?
Well, look, his goal, Peter, is to bring this war to an end, period.
Didn't answer the question, did he?
There has been ongoing fighting on both sides.
You wrote in an op-ed in the fall of 2023 that, quote, Putin is to blame, certainly like Al-Qaeda was to blame for 9/11. Mm-hmm. Do you still feel that way now, or do you share the president's assessment as he says Ukraine is to blame for the start of this war?
Well, it shouldn't surprise you that I share the president's assessment on all kinds of issues. What I wrote as a member of Congress was as a former member of Congress. Look, what I share the president's assessment on is that the war has to end. This is a president of peace, and who here would argue against peace?
Okay, so you do.
Embarrassing. Meanwhile, President Trump's special envoy to Ukraine.
Obviously, the Americans would, because they never did support the windmill ministries.
Ukrainian spokesman later said it was the U.S. side who requested the change, that the U.S. wanted the cancellation. In a social media post, Zelensky called the meeting productive and a good discussion.
Let's go on here. I want to listen to this guy from North Carolina real quick. He pretty well laid it out there on the line.
Caused America to shift sides in geopolitics. We are apparently now on Team Russia in this conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Watching that clip of Mike Waltz, you have to say that is literally the humiliation of a public figure, to not be able to look the American people in the eye and to say, the sky is blue, to not be able to say that, no, Ukraine did not bear the responsibility for itself being invaded. This is an astonishing reversal in geopolitics. But at the same time, I have to say, as someone who lived in Moscow for the first few years of Vladimir Putin's tenure, what we're seeing here inside America with the use of Putin-like tactics and the efforts to demolish independent power centers in our country, in our institutions, our checks and balances, that to me as well is something that we need to focus on. It's not just that Donald Trump has a pro-Putin take now on the Russia-Ukraine war, but Donald Trump is using Vladimir Putin's playbook on the American people.
Uh-huh.
Claire McCaskill, the stakes are much higher now because we are in a place where Russia is at war with a country that it invaded, and actually the bloodiest war since Hitler's invasion of Poland and the rest of Europe back in World War II. There are parallels, though, with President Trump's first term. We've talked an awful lot about the Helsinki press conference, where he said he trusted Vladimir Putin more than he trusted his own intel agency heads that he appointed. We talked about how other Republicans continued to pass really tough sanctions. Here, I just wrote down, we have a Secretary of State who has been a Cold War hawk. I mean, his family escaped from Cuba, so he's earned his street cred there in a very dramatic way. We have an NSA director who has always been a hawk. We saw Tom Tillis go on the floor yesterday and say on the Senate floor what every Republican, or almost every Republican, is saying in the GOP cloakroom. We have General Kellogg, a man who every general and admiral I've talked to that knows him feels good about him being there, believing that he's going to fight for the right thing. We've got the New York Post, of course, this morning, and we've had the New York Post for the past several days, along with the Wall Street Journal editorial page, just eviscerating President Trump's negotiating position and his statements. So we actually do have, for the most part, President Trump standing alone and calling Zelensky a dictator and blaming Zelensky and Ukraine for the start of this war. Where do you think
Exactly.
this leads?
Well, let's talk politics here. We've got some Republican senators who know many of the things Trump is doing are illegal, wrong, and will hurt America both in the short run and the long run. They have been afraid to speak out. They've been afraid to stand up to some of his most incompetent nominees for the cabinet. But this is a moment they can do it politically. America understands that you do not instigate a war when someone invades your country. Can you imagine if Canada invaded the United States and we said, well, it's the United States' fault? Or if Mexico invaded the United States, we said, well, you know, that really was America's fault that Mexico invaded them. So what would he have had Zelensky do when Russia marched into his country, killing people, innocent people, in order to gain control of his country? Was he supposed to say, hey, that's okay? Zelensky's supposed to go, hey, great job, Putin, take our country. And America knows that. So these Republicans have political cover. Tom Tillis did that because he knows the people of North Carolina understand that Russia is the bad guy. So what they need to do, and this would really help this country for the next 4 years, the Republicans on the Armed Services Committee, Tom Cotton, Joni Ernst, Deb Fisher, Mike Rounds, all these guys, they, Dan Sullivan, they need to do a press conference with Roger Wicker and say, we do not agree. Ukraine is the victim here, and Putin is the perpetrator. And I think it would go a long way towards helping Ukraine. It would go a long way towards checking Putin. And frankly, they would have the people of America on their side.
What you see is Senator McCaskill there trying to urge her former colleagues on the Republican side reestablish that up is up and down is down when the entire thing has been turned on its head when the way the president talks about Ukraine and Russia. But even at Congress's doorstep, we're seeing that these changes are going to bear fruit. You saw Speaker Johnson, Dave at CPAC just yesterday, basically saying aid to Ukraine is done. You heard boos from within the room. I mean, foreign policy isn't just happening on the foreign stage. It is very much happening in domestic circles here as well.
Oh, yes. Trump has, over time, replaced Republicans who disagree with him with Republicans who don't. That hasn't happened to Roger Wicker yet, but give it time.
Yeah.
And that was a story at CPAC, as Elon Musk clearly was the star of it. But foreign dignitaries who are showing up, the leaders of kind of far-right parties in Europe, and members of Congress showing up were really talking about how great it was for the Elon Musk model of governance, taking over and having tech guys work through things, cut them, was the model to follow. You saw Mike Johnson on stage disagreeing with the idea of a Doge dividend, for example, this idea that has come up from Musk supporters, really, that whatever savings Doge comes up with next year, there should be a check sent out to people. Johnson disagreed. Elon showed up and said he thinks it's a great idea, and Trump was on board. And you've seen this pattern for years, but intense in the last month, of Republicans who do have power, who can move bills, who can stop bills, who can choose to fund things or not, going along with the entire Trump agenda. I think it's going to get tougher as they actually have to make funding decisions, as they did last night, because they have on the other side Democrats who have not a majority, but enough votes to slow things down, who don't believe that any deal they make with Republicans can survive if Trump doesn't want it to.
But that's why I call it the Putinization of America. It's not just about foreign policy. The collapse of one of our two political parties, when someone who obviously had a position of principle saying that, Russia is the aggressor, is literally unable to articulate basic facts because the leader doesn't believe them. We've been sort of lying to ourselves, I think, again and again. We're like, oh, well, maybe this senator this time will speak out. And I think we're missing the bigger story here, which is that, folks, the Republicans in the Senate are on Team Trump. They are part of what has become a pro-Russian party that is running this country.
And it's playing out on the global stage, it's playing on the national stage, and it's playing out on the state level. Case in point, a nonprofit group backed by Elon Musk is spending over $1 million in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, supporting conservative candidate Brad Schimel over the liberal candidate Susan Crawford. Musk's group has launched attack ads against Crawford for recommending what they consider to be lenient prison sentences from the bench. Crawford has also received donations from out-of-state billionaires like philanthropist and mega donor George Soros, Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker of Illinois, and LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman. The outcome of the election, which will be held on April 1st, will decide the balance of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, which is then expected to decide cases on union rights, redistricting, and abortion rights all later this year. Joining us now, Chair of the Democratic Party of Wisconsin, Ben Wickler. Ben, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Let's talk here, starting with Elon Musk's influence.
Let's go forward here. Get away from the horse and pony show. I want to listen to this guy from North Carolina.
Has released his debut book titled How to Win at Travel. It reveals major secrets from the travel industry.
They skip around a lot on their newscaster agencies. They jump from one thing to another thing to another thing, and they don't stick to the same thing, and it makes people wonder, well, why do they do that? Especially something as serious as our democracy. Right here, this guy right here, listen. Listen to what he's got to say from North Carolina.
268-8923.
I support President Trump, and I believe that most of his policies on national security are right. I believe his instincts are pretty good. But what I'm telling you, whoever believes that there is any space for Vladimir Putin in the future of a stable globe better go to Ukraine. They better go to Europe. They better invest the time to understand that this man is a cancer and the greatest threat to democracy in my lifetime. So, ladies and gentlemen, when I tell you that Vladimir Putin is a liar, a murderer, and a man responsible for ordering the systematic torture, kidnapping, and rape of innocent civilians, believe me, because the evidence is mile high. If you believe that Ukraine is a country an ocean away and not relevant to our national security, think again. The world is small. The world is watching. The strength of our alliances are on the line, and the future of democracy in the world is on the line if we do anything less than defeat Vladimir Putin.
That is Republican Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina on the Senate floor yesterday, actually saying the quiet part out loud, voicing the concerns of the Senate floor, on the Senate floor, that most of his fellow Republicans are whispering in the GOP cloakroom, and what America's closest allies are voicing across Western democracies that stood by the United States of America in our fight against Nazism and Soviet communism. And also, the same concerns being voiced among Donald Trump's most loyal defenders in the media. Most this morning are still asking whether Mr. Trump's cruel positioning against Ukraine is merely some misaligned, some disastrous opening bid in negotiations, or a drastic realignment of U.S. foreign policy that will be more dangerous, more immoral, and encourage more Russian invasions across Eastern and Central Europe. Just ahead, we're going to show you how Donald Trump's national security advisor is now trying to explain the president's position, which is exactly the opposite of what his has been when he was a member of Congress. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe. It's Friday, February 21st. With us, we have co-host of our fourth hour and contributing writer at The Atlantic, Jonathan Lemire, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist and associate editor of The Washington Post, Eugene Robinson. We have writer-at-large for The New York Times, Elizabeth Buehmiller, managing editor at The Bulwark, Sam Stein, and also we have the host of Way Too Early, Ali Vitale. And you know, Gene, we're gonna get to Ukraine in a minute, but I just think we shouldn't let what Tom Tillis said go by without a comment off the top. What Senator Tillis said is actually publicly is what almost every Republican senator is saying privately. What almost every Republican House member is saying privately that's on the Armed Services Committee or the Foreign Affairs Committee. They are horrified by what they're hearing. And now we're going to be reporting that the G7 has scrubbed their official communique to take out Russia as the aggressor in a war that Vladimir Putin clearly started.
Yeah, absolutely. So the G7 cannot publish a joint statement with the phrase Russian aggression in it. Look, this is insane, but you talk about it as, well, maybe it's an opening.
It's a sick type insanement, if you ask me, because everybody and their brother knowed that it was Putin that was killing innocent civilians over there. That needs to be dealt with on a international global scale of breaking all the Geneva Agreement rules the way that he did. It reaches the level of tyranny, treason. For a United States president to do something like this is horrifying. Absolutely horrifying.
Opening bid, people were saying this is Trump being Trump or whatever. I don't see why anyone should not believe him. He likes Vladimir Putin. He can't stand Vladimir Zelensky. We know that. You know how much of foreign policy, domestic policy, how much of life is just personal to Donald Trump. His own grievances, his own petty slights that he believes that he experienced. And I think he fully intends to follow through with this new, completely un-American, disastrous foreign policy that he has outlined in the last few days.
Yeah, and he's made it deeply personal, calling Zelensky a modestly successful comedian, calling for new elections in Ukraine, demanding half their minerals with their deal. We did hear Secretary of State Rubio behind closed doors trying to reassure Europeans that maybe U.S. policy not changing as much as they're positioning publicly, but that's basically, Joe, that has left, allies and adversaries alike sort of bewildered. But at the end of the day, this is Donald Trump's decision. And let's remember, it's very reminiscent of the first term, where Trump publicly, very friendly towards Putin, but the administration and the Congress at times took steps to punish Russia. We'll have to see if that happens around this time too. Certainly Senator Tillis breaking with the White House yesterday, saying publicly what so many of his colleagues are saying privately. Others have been very much more modest in their criticism, saying they disagree with the idea that Putin is a good guy, but not willing to actually criticize Trump for what he's saying. We're going to have to see this time, though, if the guardrails hold, where this time Trump pushes through and says, look, this is our new approach to Moscow and Europe.
And again, we really had a tale of two administrations in the first term. It's so important for people to remember that in the first administration, you have Donald Trump saying things like he said at the Helsinki press conference in 2018 in response to your question, that he trusted Vladimir Putin more than his own people that he put in to run the intel community. At the same time, his vice president was going to Western Europe delivering speeches that were Reagan-esque, anti-Soviet, anti anti-Russian aggression. You of course also had Republicans in the Senate at the same time when Donald Trump was saying things that caused grave concerns among many Republicans. They were passing the toughest sanctions that had ever been passed on Russia. So we'll see if this is an opening bid. We'll see if you in fact have Russians having to actually step up and make sacrifices at the negotiating table if they want it to end, or whether this is, again, a radical new step, a radical new direction for the United States foreign policy. Regardless, the cost, the impact of that on our foreign policy, even if it's reeled back in the next week, and there's no reason to believe it would be, is incalculable, and will once again have our allies, our closest allies, our most important allies, asking the question: can we trust the United States of America? Elizabeth, one other thing too that I don't think people are underlining enough. I know we've talked about it a little bit on this show, but all things are personal with Donald Trump. Foreign policy is personal with Donald Trump. If he decides that he likes the most bloodthirsty dictator on earth in North Korea, and they write love letters, he calls them love letters. Everything is personal, and it's so important to remember how Donald Trump's relationship with Zelensky began. It began in July of 2019 when he made the, quote, perfect phone call, as he said, where he was trying to shake down Zelensky, to dig up dirt on his political rival, Joe Biden, and his family while he was in the middle of a presidential campaign, and basically saying you can get your $400 million that Congress has already appropriated, but before you do, I need you to dig up dirt on Joe Biden. Zelensky refused to do that. And if people want to understand why he loathes Zelensky so much, that's a good place to start.
Yes, and then of course Zelensky made the great mistake of actually saying the truth, which is that Donald Trump was in a web of disinformation, and I'm sure Trump just was shocked that Zelensky had. It was the most critical thing that Zelensky's ever said of Trump in public, and so then you got the backlash from Trump saying that Zelensky basically started the war. I think it's interesting, especially Marco Rubio's role here, though, that he is. What he was saying to the Europeans in a call after Trump sidled up to Putin was that keep calm. This is not a major change in the administration's policy. Of course it is, and of course it is against what Rubio himself. He's he's a big Russia hawk. So it's if you're a European and you're seeing this, you hear on one hand from the commander in chief that we're going to be closer to Russia. On the other hand, you hear from the Secretary of State, pay no attention. You're in a state of confusion, and I can tell you, most Europeans are going to pay attention to what the president is saying and not what the Secretary of State is saying.
Coming up, we're going to get to what Democrats are calling the Trump administration's slash and burn approach to mass federal firings.
I'm particularly concerned about refunds. As the ranking Democrat on the Senate Finance Committee, we focus on services to taxpayers, and I'm very concerned about the possible delay in refunds.
I mean, Allie, anybody that's ever dealt with the IRS and calling them for any reason understands that most of those workers there have such a backlog. It takes so long to get in touch with agents because they just don't have enough workers. They're also working with data and they're working on computers that in many cases are decades old. Their technology is absolutely horrific. And at the end of the day, of course, maybe politicians want to paint the IRS as the bad guys, and because they audited Donald Trump too much, Donald Trump would say. In the end of the day, it is working Americans trying to get their refund. It's middle-class Americans trying to get the refunds they can't afford. The lawyers or whatever millionaires and billionaires can afford to take care of their problems with the IRS. It's going to be working class and middle class taxpayers who are going to be impacted by this. And you can go down the line, whether you look at the cuts at TSA.
My God, how much more worse would you want to get? can't believe it. We're hearing what we're hearing right now.
Immediate application, but that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, creates the information revolution. Or I mean, it's
Let's go on. Just shifts from one extreme to another, giving out way too many signals. And this time it's obvious that something is wrong somewhere with the leadership of our great nation.
Performing well, whether it has the right number of people, too many, too few, all that's true. That's not what's happening here. We're not having a thoughtful debate about the size of government and where things make sense and where they don't. We're just seeing, as he shows with that image at CPAC, taking a chainsaw to it. And I think that they love that image because it makes them look manly and, powerful, and they're taking on the deep state. And that's appealing on some level to a lot of MAGA Republicans. On the other hand, there are a lot of people who voted for Trump who do think the government needs to be reined in, but don't like, as that constituent said, a sloppy, haphazard approach where they're firing the nuclear safety people one day and oops, they have to rehire them the next, or the bird flu people one day are fired, oops, we need to rehire them again. That's not a thoughtful and smart way of going things in the view of a lot of Republicans who think that there ought to be a methodical and important debate here. Now, a lot of Republicans say, look, we've tried having that over the years, it didn't work, so let's give this a shot, see what happens. But the political costs could eventually backlash on Trump and Elon Musk.
The bottom line is this: what we're seeing is hemorrhaging of a great nation that has made so many mistakes in the past that now this government has put its own people in jeopardy. And it's almost like either a woman travailing with a child or somebody hemorrhaging at the point of fixing to die. We're seeing this in broad daylight of a system that has been broken now for quite some times. And that was the primary reason why my brother and I put up the broken cross out here in representing the cross as it being the system, because the Romans used the cross as an instrument, a tool to capitalize on capital punishment crimes. And whenever you have a country that no longer has that, then you have a out of control country. You have a broken system. And all this other wish-washy stuff back and forth, it's just part of the irresponsibility coming from our United States government that proves that much more that it has failed its own people. And I hate to say that, but it's the truth. I love this country. I love everything about what this country originally stood for and how that it sacrificed the sacrifices going all the way back to the Revolutionary War. But the things that's been going on today is not the good old USA, according to the history books that I've read about her. Good luck to all of us. God bless America. God bless our troops. God bless our endeavors. And shalom.